Welcome everybody at day 4 of the Atelier for Solidarity for Vancouver. We're still at day 3. So good evening, Vancouver. Good morning, Europe, MENA and Africa. And good afternoon, Australia and Oceania. The Atelier for Solidarity is organized by the Festival Academy, which is an initiative of the European Festivals Association. We set it up in response to COVID-19. To reimagine our world together. We are a group of about 80 artists, festival managers, curators, as well as cross-sectoral initiatives as social movements, foundations, to put our creative minds together. We have today a panel on online festivals. I welcome here Jeff Kahn from the Sydney performance space. Rashmi from ArtX Company and Sepehr Sharifzadeh, the artistic director of NH Theatre Agency. The panel will be facilitated by Mike van Graan, South African playwright. So the word is all to you.
Okay, so we're going to be starting with Sepehr from Iran and then go to Rashmi in India and end off with Jeff in Sydney, and they'll each have 10 to 12 minutes just to present on the theme. I might ask a few questions to get things going, and then of course, as usual, you're all welcome to indicate that you'd like to ask questions as well. So Sepehr, over to you.
Hello. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Inge. I'm Sepehr Sharifzadeh, as Inge said. Also, I'm representing here the NH Theatre Agency. It's a theater booking agency based in Tehran, Iran, and it's been almost 8 years that we established the agency in order to facilitate the world. Sorry, and along with that, with the other projects that we are doing, because this agency is a subset of a bigger international art and culture institute. So we do have a publication that we mainly focus on publishing books on theater, on theories of theater. And along with that, we also do festival management because that's my personal passion. I love festivals. I love this collective spirit and energy that runs in the veins of people during the festival. And because of that, in 2017, I attended the Atelier for Young Festival Managers in Shanghai. And after that, I was invited by Inge to attend the Atelier Next as an observer guest speaker, which was happening in Kortrijk, a very capitalistic city in south of Belgium. And here we are in the digital atelier. And recently, because of the pandemic, when the pandemic hit Iran in the beginning of March, a friend of mine from San Francisco, who's also here, Nima, suggested that we do an online festival, a digital festival based on our abilities and our skills. Because Nima is an expert in digital theater. He studied digital theater in America. And with another friend of us, Fari Bors, all three of us, we decided that, okay, let's do it. Let's do something crazy. Let's do something that no one would do, because most of the festivals that were in a way happening or moving online during this time, they were basically showing pre-recorded videos or videos on demand, which was like, if anybody was listening to Orva yesterday, it's the same thing that you're doing each year. So it's kind of getting a boring cycle. And so we decided that, okay, we would like a festival, and then we would like people to produce shows for this specific platform, which is Instagram. I would just give a quick statistics of the festival, and then I would go more into details of it. The festival happened in 2 phases. The first phase was between 25th to 30th of March, which was the Iranian New Year, where everybody is at home, stuck at home. And it happened during 6 days. And then the next phase was between 4th to 17th of April, during 14 days. So in total, the festival happened during 20 days with 46 performances from 22 countries and 5 continents, with 24 panel discussions about all sorts of topics like presentation and representation, redefining historiography in the digital age, history of cyberperformance and digital theater, liveness in digital performances, impact of internet in performing arts, and digital theater transformation into immersive theater. The festival was a multi-arts festival. We had performances, music, painting, storytelling, poetry reading, story reading from Berlin, actually, which was an interesting storytelling, installation, dance, and musical duets. And in total, we had 6,000 followers on our Instagram page. And almost for each show, I would say we reached an audience of 400 to 600 audiences per show, which is a massive amount of audience comparing to an analog version of a festival. I would like to use this word because yesterday we were talking with a couple of friends during this atelier that maybe physical festival would could in a way lean towards the physical theater festival, but rather using analog festival like the photography of analog and digital would be more convenient, let's say. So comparing to an analog festival, having a show being seen by 400 to 600 audiences, especially not a show by Bob Wilson, but a show by a young theater director from India, from Africa, from Iran, from America, which is only like 15 minutes. It's a huge success, I would call it, for those artists. And then regarding the marketing of the festival, what we did was that we prepared these very short sentences, like a catchy phrase about a show that, okay, a show about gender fluidity from India. And then we would add the link of the Instagram page of the festival where the show was happening live, and send it towards our WhatsApp group, WhatsApp people, Facebook Messenger, to like people personally, to just bring them on to watch it. Because what we were talking earlier before the session started was this word in French, which the word is flâneur, which means wandering without any purpose. And all of us during this time of pandemic, in a way, became a flâneur in the digital world. And like having a digital festival have this benefits that the people does not necessarily know to watch the trailer of the show, to come inside the venue and then say, oh, damn, I made a mistake. This show is not mine, because they don't have it. But this way they could go like as a wanderer, as someone who's wandering the streets, just go inside, see what if they like it, and not really, I didn't like it, but if they like it, they would stay, and then you would have your audiences. So this would be also one of the opportunities of the digital world, that you would have lots of flâneur from all around the world during the pandemic, especially. And then something that was like a challenge for us was mainly the festival, like moving a festival in a digital world out of nothing, like not having a infrastructure for an analog festival would be very hard, also for the audience building, because you got to begin from the scratch and bring all of the 7,000 audiences that we brought for the Instagram page. It needed lots of like talking and marketing. But something that was really important for all of us, that I keep mentioning in any session that I go, was that this festival was a pro bono festival. It totally happened on a volunteer basis. All of us, Nima, Faribors, and I, we've worked as volunteers. Also the artists, we didn't pay the artist anything. And just to mention in a parenthesis, I'm not promoting not paying the artist. This is not fair. I'm just saying during this pandemic time, it was all about human connections and heart-to-heart relations. It wasn't about economy. It wasn't about money. Monetizing events not necessarily could help promoting the event, but sometimes the human connections are the things that we need, especially in these crazy times. Maybe for the next edition of the festival, we would also apply for a fund to get a fund and to be able to pay the artist. But the main reason that we couldn't pay the artist was this could also, in a way, go under the challenges of a festival, because being from Iran, we do have the embargoes from America, so we don't have any credit cards or international banking. So technically, we cannot pay anyone, even if we wanted, even if we do have the money. So that's why we said, okay, let's do it volunteer-based. And then we just simply called the artist, hello, how are you? Is everything good in wherever you are? And hey, I'm doing this festival on a humane basis, not on an economic basis. There wouldn't be any ticket selling. Would you like to perform? Would you like to produce a show for this platform? And then they would say, yeah, of course, with pleasure. And this way we had 46 shows from 22 countries, which is a huge statistics even now, because after the pandemic, after the festival, I began flaneuring in the internet for different digital festivals and for digital happenings and events. And I noticed that our festival was, in a way, a very special festival, because it was so far one of the fewest festivals that actually produced this kind of art, this digital art format, rather than just playing and streaming videos on demand, the pre-recorded videos from the artists, which I don't want to call, but the artist who has been working since 1988, and their video belongs to 1988 actually, and still some festivals are re-streaming them online. So that's it for now. I might send some links that I found useful during these times, which one of them was a festival in Netherlands. And thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much, Sepehr. Do you have a link to your festival? Are there pictures that people could maybe have a look at? And if you do, could you put that in the chat group for people to have a look? Yeah,
definitely. I will send a link to our trailer and also our Facebook and Instagram page. And Nima is here. I would like him because he had a very important role in like promoting this art form. I had no idea about this art form, but Nima had this great idea. Just wave your hand.
Nima, would you like to say something now? Because Sepehr has kind of used just about 6 minutes of his allocated 10, so you can have 5. If you'd like to say something about it.
I just want to say hi. I have nothing prepared for 6 minutes, but hi everyone. It's a pleasure to see all of you in this virtual platform, and thanks for Sepehr for the great introduction about the festival. And yeah, it was a great experience, and Sepehr brought his many years experience, and I know he had been working with Festival Academy and amazing teamwork, and it worked out, we think. And hopefully the second round of the festival in September is going to be better. And I think Sepehr is sending a link to our social media and the website. We would be happy to talk about it after the session or in future.
Great.
Thanks again.
Okay. Are you based in San Francisco, Nima?
Currently I'm in San Francisco. Yes, I'm based in Tehran and San Francisco, like 6 months.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So thank you for joining us. It's still Tuesday on your side of the world as well.
Yeah, still Tuesday.
Okay, so thank you. We'll bring you into the discussion a little bit later, but thank you for joining us.
I'd be happy, definitely. Yeah.
Okay, super. Rashmi, Mumbai.
Hi. Thank you for that, Sepehr. That was really interesting for me to understand, from different parts of the world, how people are looking at their work online. Just to, Inge has already given us a small introduction, but just to give you a context of what I'm going to be presenting is actually a smattering of festivals in India that have managed to move online. I'm going to be sharing a little bit about each of those festivals and then talk about some of the key characteristics about those festivals that has made us think about what's going on in this entire space, right? And my perspective is coming from the fact that we run a project in India with the British Council called Festival Connections, where for the past year, we've been working with various festivals and talking about critical issues around festival making and management, from leadership and governance, audience development, diversity and inclusion, and more recently on areas and topics connected to COVID-19. So everything from financial health management, health and safety, gig workers, because they form a huge part of the festival economy from a managerial point of view. And the next session actually, which we're having next week, is precisely on this topic, which is on digital festivals and revenue models. So this is the background and the perspective from which I will be sharing these insights with you. I have been told that I speak very fast. So if you want me to slow down, just raise your hand, go like this, and I will try and slow down. So with that,
I think that, Rashmi, that's quite an important thing, because we have been asked, for those of us who do speak English as a first language, to slow down a little bit. So just bear that in mind. Thank you.
Absolutely. I've been asked to slow down when I was in the UK, so I know I need to, and I will. So I'm just going to share my screen. I have a small presentation for you, which I'll be taking you through. Is that visible to everyone? All good? Okay. So this is the first festival that I wanted to talk about, which is the Mami Film Festival. Mami is one of the biggest film festivals in this country. As you know, India is anyways a crazy film country. And Mami is one of those few international festivals that's able to bring in participation from across the world. It's a hugely popular festival in India. And what they did this time is they moved onto this global platform where about 21 film festivals participated, including the New York Film Festival, Tribeca. I think there was the South African Film Festival. There were a bunch of them that got together, Kahn as well. And they had a festival from the 29th of May to the 7th of June. So they have been a part of this, what is called the We Are One Film Festival, where they got all of these festivals to put about 3 or 4 films from their countries. People were allowed to watch the films for free, and the monies were raised towards COVID-19. So this was one of the festivals that managed to move fast. In addition to that, what they have started doing is that they have started doing these workshops. If you go to the website, you'll see a year-round program. And they are doing a series of workshops which are getting to be really popular. I think each workshop is getting them at least about £1,000 in revenue with people wanting to sort of engage with learning and development. So this was one festival. Of course, there is YouTube, and it also started raising monies initially with the One Nation Festival in India. There were a bunch of organizations, including one of the companies that runs a big music festival in this country called Tenets 7 Weekender. That festival is still a while away. It usually occurs between September and March, depending on which part of the country the festival is taking place in. But they managed to get their artists together and do something online and raise money on YouTube for COVID-19. This was a very interesting one. This is one of India's largest youth summits. They call themselves a summit, but it's a sort of festival format where they get content around topics, concerns, issues, culture that connect with the youth of this country. And they've actually had a very, very strong digital program as well, because they work with digital natives and their focus is digital natives. So their perspective of how do you create content for this community, how do they consume content online, has been at the forefront of their work. What they managed to do this year is they managed to move their entire summit online, and they called it the Pajama Edition. And they said you can just sort of sit in your pajamas and enjoy the festival, and they managed to curate a bunch of content. What was interesting here is that because they work very much with the youth, they have deep networks with campuses and universities across the country. And what they did was that they empowered those communities, campuses, and ambassadors and gave them toolkits on how do you create a digital festival online, and encouraged them to create their own mini festivals on the college or university pages. So this actually ended up being, if I'm not mistaken, when I was talking to them, they told me they managed to reach 46 universities and colleges as a part of this Pajama Edition, which I thought was a great way of talking about collaboration and encouraging communities that may not be able to think and pivot online as fast. So this was another example. This is based out of Bangalore. I forgot to mention the cities. The first festival, Mami, is based out of Mumbai. Not that it really matters in COVID-19 times, but I just thought I should mention the breadth of festivals and where they are coming from. This was another interesting one. The Serendipity Arts Festival is a hugely exciting multi-arts festival in the country. It takes place in Goa every year. It actually looks at 7 or 8 genres or disciplines. They present in these disciplines, and it's a deeply rich festival. They're able to, because as you know, India has not just one classical dance, but 8 classical dances and several more folk dances. To be able to get that kind of breadth and width of content into one festival is quite phenomenal. So when COVID-19 hit, what they started doing was an interesting balance of looking at the archival content. So what I call, the second life of content, which has been possible because of COVID-19, where people are happy to now watch content that was 3 or 4 years old, which only, gets, you're accessing that content when you require, as opposed to that content being there for you to be able to play with. So Serendipity is one of the festivals that started putting archival content, but they also started creating new content, and they had a 1-week digital festival where it was a balance of, hey, this is what we've done so far, and here's a recut or re-edited version for you, but we've got many more exciting sessions and talks for you as well. So they managed to move really, really quick around this as well. Of course, scale is really important in this case. Jaipur Literature Festival is a lit festival based out of Jaipur. It's one of the more popular festivals known all over the world. It has editions in other parts of the world as well. GLF has, since the very beginning of COVID-19 and continues to do, every second evening, they end up having these small discussions between authors from across the world. And they're continuing to do this right now. It's ongoing. So it's remarkable. For about a couple of months, they've not stopped this. So what was interesting about this was a festival of this scale and the longevity that they're able to drive because of the networks and skills, as not just a time-bound 1-week festival, but as an ongoing celebration. This was a very interesting project. This was a zine making festival where they matched different artists together, and they had to meet each other online and collaborate online and create content, which was basically zines. So there was an artist, an illustrator that was put together, and sometimes a writer as well, and they collaborated on it. This was a really bad picture. I'm going to share with you the link of this project, but it was a very interesting project. Again, visual arts centric. This was a sum total of the kind of festivals that we've seen that have moved online. As you see, I've covered a wide range. Some of the festivals which originated online, something like Pulp Society, gave a creative trigger to artists to be able to create online, as opposed to something pre-existing that's trying to make sense of what the universe is like online, as opposed to some of the bigger mega festivals like a Jaipur Literature Festival or a Serendipity or a Mami Film Festival, which was able to move really fast. And then, of course, there are more youth-based festivals that start thinking. The work begins with digital thinking. So the way they were able to move has been quite different. I'm going to show you 2 more festivals, because this is something that I spoke about yesterday, which seems to be a major concern for us right now. Is India is not just about the kind of festivals that we're talking about, which are human manufactured, economy driven contexts of operation, which we understand fits into the larger festival economy framework. The cultural festivals in India also stem from the religious festival context, which is a very complex space to deal with in this country. And as you can see, this is a recipe for disaster when it comes to COVID-19, but this is what is loved by thousands and millions of people in this country. So one big question that we have is what kind of shape and form will such cultural and religious festivals take in the months to come and in the year to come, because this is definitely going to change shape and form in terms of how people come together as communities to even create festivals of this sort. So before I deep dive a little more into this next section, which is the British Council Festival Connections that I was talking about. Like I mentioned, we've been talking to about 30 festivals over the last year, some of which you've seen highlighted in this presentation, where we've tried to make sense of what is it that's driving them, what are the challenges that they're facing, and especially in the last 2.5 months, to understand what are their concerns and how do we learn and do peer sharing and learn from each other. So this is the next session that's happening, which is precisely on this topic that I was talking about. But I would like to stop my screen share for a second and share with you a couple of more thoughts before we move on to the questions. So one thing that's come through very, very strongly is which were the kind of festivals that were able to pivot online really fast, right? So first of all, it was festivals that already had a strong digital presence and were already tech friendly. So something like an Under 25 Pajama Summit were able to do that really quickly. Of course, something like a film festival is far more tech friendly than a visual arts, for that matter, music festival. So that is one way to look at festival making online is, what are your strengths in digital, and how did they manage to move fast using those strengths? The second thing that we noticed in our work is the festivals that were managed to move online quite fast were also festivals with strong leadership and management, who they were not afraid to innovate and they were not afraid to make mistakes. The third thing that we noticed was festivals which had very, very strong partnerships and collaborations. Their ability to talk to other people and make sense of how and which direction do we move in was far more feasible as compared to smaller festivals that may not have that kind of trajectory. And of course, capital. If you have the money, if you have your cash flow that elongates your runway, you're able to move really fast. So that did happen. At the same time, there were smaller festivals, which were not really festivals, but created digital content from a festival perspective online through very interesting partnerships and drive. But those initiatives have now quietened down just because it requires energy, capital, and support to be able to drive them through. And that's another concern of the sustainability of such aspects. Sepehr pointed out about how all artists manage to do it for free. But if you're talking about a future for digital festivals, those are the key questions that we need to ask. Who's driving that kind of innovation and pivoting, and how sustainable is this driving innovation if it's not supported? In India, we've not had any government support for the arts as of now, any formal government support for the arts as of now. So everything that you're seeing currently, all these festivals are self-initiated. We just published an article yesterday where we called it bootstrapping our survival. That's pretty much what we are doing right now. So these are some of the key questions that we are dealing with at the moment. From an opportunities point of view, one of the things we've sort of seen through these festivals, and again, you've all pointed that out, is you suddenly have this massive global audience, which otherwise you would not have access to because of the physical constraints of the festival itself, and all the other issues and concerns that go around it. The production costs, of course, have come down. So you're able to focus a lot more on content, a lot more on, reaching out to different kinds of artists and even paying a little bit of money because you suddenly don't have those production costs that used to take up a lot of your time and energy. And of course, you have the networks that you're able to create now is incredible. The kind of artists that you can reach. Sepehr mentioned 22 countries in such a short span of time. In real life, that would have taken us about 3 years to make sense of and get together. So it's a real opportunity that we are also looking at the moment. From a challenges point of view, and I'm going to cover this. Mike, can I go on or should I leave this for the Q&A? Yeah, okay.
Go on, it's fascinating. So please proceed.
Sure. So in terms of challenges, one of the key things in India, like I mentioned, is of course funding, but it's not just funding, right? It's about what space and value are you allocating to the arts and festivals in this point of time when everybody's struggling with the uncertainty and mental health, but they're still not ascribing that kind of value to the arts. So that's one thing that we're really struggling with. And that sort of mirrors in the government response to the way we are building or rebuilding our work within COVID-19 and the constraints that we're dealing with as well. That also connects to a larger question of unequal access to technology in this country. As you know, we're currently also dealing with a humanitarian crisis. We're dealing with a migrant crisis. So there are concerns of basic needs, but also with that, internet has become really important because there is misinformation. And within that context, how are people going to be accessing cultural content? So this is a big question for us. A huge proportion of the cultural workforce is actually technical professionals who don't have work right now. And how are they being able to access the kind of content that we're putting out there, the kind of festivals that we're putting out there? So it's a big question is, who is this for and who's actually consuming this within your core regions and countries that we are we're talking to. And what's interesting is that's the space that smaller community-led festivals were able to provide context and voice to, which currently we're not being able to see it with that level of quick pivoting, so to speak. In terms of other challenges, of course, digital literacy in the festival team and in the festival audiences is low. So their ability to take on experiences online is a bit of challenge. It's also measurement is a bit of a challenge. How do you measure engagement through page views is still a big question. On a physical parameter, there is legitimacy as well as metrics of measurement that we've agreed to. So that continues to be a challenge. One thing that we've noticed is there is low value for digital experiences, which has been something that we've been struggling with. Like, how do people value that this event is worth 200 rupees or 300 rupees. So that value construction is a very interesting space at the moment. Currently it's low, but there is a lot of potential for it to be, to be scaled up. And the challenge, of course, to adapt to different art forms, to the digital platform. When we're talking about music or theater or dance, it's a completely different ballgame. When we're talking about visual arts or lectures, it's far easier. Particularly with music, one of the questions that we were dealing with, we spoke to a bunch of, Hindustani classical musicians, Indian classical musicians, and they're sitting together, and there are about 5 musicians, and they all play a role, right? Because not all the time is your music digitized or amplified. So when you have a tanpura player who provides the basic tone for the singer to sing with, on a computer speaker, that doesn't work. So they have to reimagine aspects of performance completely for this space, for the unforeseeable future, without really having the kind of technical support that they otherwise would have in a physical festival. So what's actually happening is that you've got, I had earlier mentioned Second Life of festivals, you've got archival content, which is very easy to move and transmit online. You've got current art forms which have to make sense of how do they perform online, so your music, dance, theater. And then you've got new cultural content which can be reimagined online. So there are these 3 frameworks of content development online which are still being figured out, for the want of a better word. And I think it's still going to take a little bit of time before it's figured out to an extent where that we can talk about strong revenue models. But if we have to reimagine content on a festival context online, I think these 3 categories would be a good way to think about it. And the challenges within these 3 categories would be a good way, certainly, to think about it. I have another section on possibilities, but I'll leave that for a discussion. I think it'll be interesting to sort of, share these thoughts with our other panelists. But that's me for now.
Well, that was great. I mean, I personally had no idea about the scale of digital festivals happening in India. I mean, it's really amazing and impressive about how quickly these festivals have adapted to this particular space at this time. So thank you very much for that, and thank you for speaking so fast, because I think you got double your time in that particular time. Thanks, Rashmi. Jeff, let's go on to Sydney.
Sure. Hi. Thanks for having me. I'm coming to you from Sydney, Australia, and as is customary here, I'd just like to begin by acknowledging the Gadigal people as the traditional owners of the land that I'm broadcasting from, and pay my respects to Gadigal elders past, present, and emerging. I'm the artistic director of an organisation in Sydney called Performance Space. We are a resident company at a larger art centre called Carriageworks. And we're 35 years old, and the focus of our programming really is on experimental and cross-disciplinary work. And that manifests on a series of residencies and artist development projects through the year. And then once a year, we stage a huge Asia-Pacific Festival of Experimental Arts called LiveWorks that happens for 2 weeks each October. And LiveWorks really looks at new developments in experimental art from our part of the world. We really position LiveWorks as an Asia-Pacific festival and really set about establishing this festival with an intention to create connections between experimental artists across the Asia-Pacific region, but then sort of to share that with a wider international audience. And that international audience that we've built up around the festival has been really one of the most exciting and important parts. And, Joyce and Erica, who are part of this group, have been part of that over the years. But I sort of didn't want to really talk about LiveWorks so much as a partner festival that we recently worked on an online festival with called Fusebox, which is a festival in Austin, Texas. It has a lot in common with what we do in that it's an experimental arts festival focusing on contemporary performing arts and cross-disciplinary kind of forms. And this year was the culmination of a 4-year exchange that we were undertaking with Fusebox, which was about a sort of curatorial exchange where I think it arose from us having a lot of shared sensibilities around interest in experimental practice and shared interest in sort of international context for contemporary performance, but also a curiosity on their part of this kind of Asia-Pacific community that we'd built up, and this acknowledgement that, from a North American perspective, you don't necessarily see a lot of representation of experimental practice practice from this part of the world. So it was a sort of exchange that was looking to culminate in me being a guest curator in this year's Fusebox Festival in April, and curating a constellation of Asia Pacific works, which were mostly live performance and exhibition-based works to happen in Austin as part of the 2020 Fusebox Festival, which was ill-fated to occur in the second half of April this year, so the 19th to the 21st. So the unique situation we found ourselves in was we'd developed an entire festival that was planned to take place in real life from the 19th to the 21st of April, raised all the money to do it, and then found that, here in Australia and in America as well, we sort of had parallel experiences of the pandemic where the world started to shut down around the beginning of March. And we were really like, the festival program had been launched, we'd announced the program, and then we're faced with this kind of impending reality that it was not going to be able to proceed in real life as we'd planned, as international travel shut down, and as public gatherings became impossible under the conditions of the pandemic. So really, it was this extremely quick pivot that we had to make collectively. And I must also say, it wasn't really me making these decisions. It was the artistic director, Ron Berry, and associate artistic director, Anna Gallagher-Ross at Fusebox, who were then sort of, what do we do with this festival that we've already announced, that we're rolling out plans to present in person that we know can't go ahead in the current climate. And, we sort of quickly realized that my program and us flying in from all over Australia and Asia was no longer possible either. So there was this very quick decision to be made that we didn't want to just cancel, and we didn't want to, all of that artistic research and the relationships that with artists that we'd built, we didn't necessarily want to just sort of cancel or postpone, and that we were all curious about this online space as a space for festival making that couldn't necessarily be a platform for the kind of work we'd planned, but might be a platform for other possibilities. And I think because we are both experimental arts organizations, we were curious about the idea of the internet and of virtual platforms as a medium for live performance. And in the sort of realm of the digital, what are the fundamental tenets of live performance that could be expanded or replicated or deepened online? And I think when you look at this, you think about the fundamental transactional relationship, that it's about the performer and the audience sharing space and also sharing time. And space and time are two things that we experience very differently online that open up a whole bunch of possibilities actually for what live performance might be. So a very early and important decision, I think, was to try not to replicate the program that we'd curated for the in-person festival online. And, Fusebox were really fantastic about actually paying out all the artist fees for those works that we'd curated, and not expecting them to just transform into an online version, but sending out a really open invitation to the artists that we'd been working with to say, hey, we're actually planning a virtual platform now. Is there an aspect of your work, or is there something entirely different that you think might be suited to this medium that you'd like to develop for an online platform? So that decision was taken, I would say the middle of March, so about a month out from when the festival was due to take place. So it happened in this extremely tight turnaround in terms of the conception of a whole new sort of festival framework and a whole new sort of infrastructure around sort of curating and presenting this platform. And my job as a guest curator then became working with the 5 artists that I had curated into the festival to see if there was an aspect of their work, or indeed something else entirely that they were working on, that they might like to trial in this online space that would make sense for them artistically and would make sense in terms of this digital medium and the different possibilities that it opened up. So it was a very quick series of conversations with those artists about what feels meaningful for you and what might be meaningful for an audience sort of at this moment in time to share. And that was really interesting. What arose from that was not really a series of live performances that were broadcast online, but each artist doing an approach that sort of made sense through the lens of their practice. So Justin Shoulder, who's a Sydney-based performance artist, did an online studio visit where he took audiences into his studio in Sydney, introduced us to his collaborators, and actually toured us around the studio, and through that medium introduced us to all of the physical things, all of the very sculptural materials that he uses to make work, all of the sort of musical elements that the musician who was sharing the space with him could talk us through, and really get an insight into kind of the creation process and the ideas behind the work, and the sort of online Q&A that came about. Everything from that to Rianto, who is an Indonesian dance artist, running an online workshop where he actually taught some of the choreographic technique to the audience at home. So it was this experience of kind of, I guess, dance, which becomes really impossible to perform live in the pandemic conditions, being transmitted from body to body across this digital space. And that was one of the really interesting discoveries for me around this virtual festival, was some of the things that really landed, even though it was at this really intense stage of lockdown and we were all still locked inside our homes at that particular point in time, was these kind of movement-based works actually in the festival, where there was an element of the movement being transmitted to you at home, and this feeling of, I guess, embodiment that created, and that feeling of not only being embodied in your own sort of lockdown space, but connected to other bodies around the world, was a really interesting discovery from the festival that I'm still sort of thinking about, and has really sort of piqued a lot of sort of interest around what are some of these possibilities for live performance in a virtual realm. I think, one of the other things about the festival, and I'll just post a link to it here in the chat group, is that they used a lot of existing live streaming platforms to make it both as sort of lo-fi and easy for the artists to broadcast from their homes, from their laptops or their phones or whatever personal devices that they had, through to platforms that were super easily accessible at home. And in a sort of American, Australian context, those were Facebook Live, Instagram Live, and YouTube Live. And one of the things that really surprised me, I guess, from the experience of, the idea of festival making, and I guess in parallel to those ideas of what are the fundamental tenets of live performance, for me, one of the fundamental tenets of festival making is actually, as opposed to just presenting shows in a venue or in a year-round context, is this feeling of a shared moment of people coming together to experience something together, and there to be some kind of conversation or shared energy or experience that happens around the experience of those works. And so one of the real sort of interesting successes for me is this sense of experiencing the work together online. And I think that came in a very practical sense through the chat functions of those live streaming platforms, and of the fact that you were able to connect with your peers from around the world and see when people were logging in and have a conversation about the work alongside actually experiencing it. That created that sense of connection between people in a time where physically we're extremely isolated from each other. We also had no idea how long the lockdown was going to last or how long this pandemic would play out. And that opportunity to actually come together became really, really important, that particular historic kind of moment in time, even to the point where Joyce, who's part of this group, created a virtual junket, which was a private Facebook group for our industry festival curator and artistic director colleagues to come and watch the shows together, to experience the performances, and to have those kinds of conversations between each other that you usually have at the bar or through a delegates or exchange program that's attached to a festival, and be able to still stay connected to each other despite not knowing when physically we'd be able to have any of those experiences again. So those were some of the really interesting sort of fundamental takeaways for me. And it's sort of interesting because now we're looking at LiveWorks, which happens here in Sydney in October. And even though we're forecasting that physical gatherings will be possible here in Australia in October, and that audiences can converge within venues with a lot of health and safety requirements around them, and that, you know, we're really looking at what a physical gathering looks like in that moment and what it can do in a broader cultural sense to bring people together and establish a shared vision of the future. We are looking at sort of having an online component of the festival this year, just to keep kind of building on those kind of learnings and the experiences that we had that were really positive of Fusebox, and the different kinds of possibilities that online experiences open up in a way that aren't possible in real life. And I guess similar to Rashmi's point, the sort of breadth of audience that you can have, because Fusebox discovered that over 10,000 people tuned in, and that audience across the virtual festival was much more geographically diverse than the audience which would have usually attended the festival in Austin, Texas in real life. And that people were deeply engaged. People would tune in and tune in for a kind of duration that sort of indicated a deep engagement with the festival and the program. So those are some of the things that we're thinking about, that, you know, even if we are able to go back into the physical world and gather in real life, and I think we all agree that there are certain parts of this virtual festival that just made us miss in-person gathering and live performance in a physical space between sort of bodies even more. But, you know, knowing that, you know, we have been affirmed in that purpose of the importance of gathering in a physical space together, but not wanting to let go of the different and wider access that a digital platform can open up, and just the different sense of liveness, which, you know, in many ways is more limited, but in many ways also opens up different experiential possibilities for the kinds of connections that artists and audiences can have. So they're all the things that we're thinking about as a result of that experience.
Great, Jeff, thank you very much for that as well. These have been 3 incredible presentations in terms of the topic, so thank you to all 3 of you. We have about half our time left for questions and discussions, so this is to invite all the participants who are online now to indicate in the chat if you have a question to any of the speakers, any comment you'd like to make, that would be great. Maybe just to start off, all of you spoke about the reach of the festivals that you've been speaking about in terms of new audiences and the like, and about the engagement. You just spoken about your audiences now, Jeff. I just wondered maybe a couple of things with regard to audiences. Was there a way in which, or is there a way in which you've gathered data about your audiences? You know, when it's an analog festival, you can get people to fill in questionnaires or whatever, and you can collect the information and you have them to market future events too. Is there a way that you've discovered that you could do it through these festivals? Secondly, in terms of the engagement of these folk with the works that you have been presenting, what mechanisms are there to determine the level of engagement, just how responsive they are to the various things that are being presented? Are they just passing through? Are they just there to have a look and then move on? Or is there some deeper level at which they have been engaged that you have more qualitative research around? And then I suppose thirdly, is there a way that you've ascertained from your audiences what they think about the digital space? What is it that they are liking, have liked about it, as opposed to the analog space, and what more might they want, or what would they like differently? So maybe just as a kickoff, since we do festivals for people rather than for ourselves. Shall we start with?
I think it'll be good to start with one of the festivals that have actually done this, and I'll come in towards the end if that's okay.
Sure. I mean, I can start in terms of the tracking. I think, and again, this is Fusebox that have done it, but sort of it's really through the analytics attached to those platforms. So through Google Analytics and Facebook Analytics, you can understand, sort of get a fairly accurate picture of who your audience was and where they tuned in from. And I think one of the main sort of measures of engagement that we were looking at was the duration that people tuned in for. And, you know, the idea of the flaneur kind of comes into it here, and, you know, do you drop in and, you know, your numbers can explode through sort of just that sort of churn of internet traffic, but how many people actually stayed for a sort of set duration and the attention span that people give to something. I think, you know, in terms of the audiences, Fusebox happened at such a particular point in time, as I was saying, and I think, you know, what we discovered then, I guess, is just that, you know, whether it's digital or in person, that desire for connection, and that this was a time in the pandemic, in the course of the pandemic, where we were all sort of locked in our living rooms. And here in Sydney, we couldn't even leave our houses unless it was for essential services, for exercise or medical appointments, or buying essential supplies. So there was a lot of anxiety about if and when we would ever see each other again, and exactly how we could be connected. So I think, you know, to me, that also spoke to not only the importance of a digital platform and its capacity to connect people across distance, but the importance, and it was a real affirmation of the importance of what we all do in terms of festival making. Because I think when you think about the pandemic, one of the fundamental kind of measures or conditions that we've all been placed under is doubt around mass gatherings and the idea of how many people can gather and where. And I think, you know, that is one of the fundamental tenets of artistically directing or curating a festival, is that it's about actually bringing people together for a common purpose. And I think for me, it just affirms that what we do is political, and that, you know, people participate in festivals because they're interested in tapping into a greater narrative or into a sort of transformative experience. So I think that's definitely one of the things that we learned, is that, you know, it was an affirmation, not necessarily of the pros and minuses of online, but of the political nature of festival making itself, and the kind of way that I think in the next 6 months, we all have a really leading role to play in terms of what comes next in global culture, because this is the forefront of thinking about how and why we gather, and then when we gather, what we mean to each other and what kind of world that we want to inhabit.
Thank you, Jeff. Sepehr?
In terms of tracking, I would say, like, yeah, Jeff is correct in terms of the final visiting, but based on like the statistics that we got from the Instagram, and also the people that we were in touch constantly, our like friends who were always watching from the arts community, yes, I would say it was very hard to keep people. That was why we invented this idea of like sending text like with a link to make sure that the people are coming, because just making the sentence that, okay, this is a show about gender fluidity from India, nobody would have the energy to go through Instagram. Okay, let me find the page and then let's like watch the live. But this way it would make sure that, okay, they would definitely click on the link and go through the website to check what's actually happening. And in a way, I would say the fixed amount of audience that were watching the shows were like something between 300 to 350. But then because we were letting the shows be on the Instagram live, but not too much, not more than 2 hours, based on the nature of the show, definitely, because of many problems that we might have confronted, let's say. We were letting the shows be in the Instagram for like 2 hours, sometimes some of the shows 24 hours, but our panel discussions were always there also on our IGTV uploaded. They were being seen by like up to 600 people, which is a massive amount of people, and we were very happy about it. And yeah, that's all.
Just what was the average length of the show that you had, Sepehr, in terms of, yeah, and how did the having to go into the digital space kind of affect the time limits of the show?
The average was, well, in the open call, we said that we would like the shows to be between 1 minute to 15 minutes, because more than that, I mean, also we kind of wanted, as a personal asking for please do this, we wanted to avoid the Russian style of theater, which exceed 2 hours, 3 hours, 5 hours, something, we didn't want to do live Dodin with 5 hours and a half. We wanted to do something authentic and something very platform oriented. So we asked the people to do it less than 15 minutes. There were some shows like among 45 shows, there were like at least maybe 5 or 6 shows that were also like up to half an hour, 35 minutes. But these were exceptions, and they also coordinated with us before that, guys, we would like to do like something more than 15 minutes because of this content. And we would say, yeah, definitely, and we were also giving them, Nima were giving them consultants over the digital format and how to move their show to digital in case of like, because some people were already have a show for an indoor space that they needed to move it on a digital format. Some people wanted to embed something from the scratch.
Sorry, Jeff, you were nodding at the point about time. Was that something that affected your festival as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think because we had such a short amount of time, we really were like, this is really an experiment into the possibilities of the medium, and we didn't really have a sort of set of goals around that. But I think there were some really interesting things, therefore, that did come up around duration, because there were very short, like 3-minute video works, right through to a 3-hour durational kind of performance jam by an American dance artist. And this idea of sort of, I guess, not only digital time, but time in the pandemic, when suddenly we were all at home and our days were much more open and they're like much less structure than we usually experience. And so there was this kind of certain sense of elastic time that sort of kind of came up through the festival. And I guess, you know, it was great for us to have a lot of contrasting different offers, because it happened over 3 days. That, you know, there were these shorter works that you could dip into and just fully immerse yourself in, to these kind of more extended kind of this sort of semi-improvised 3-hour dance performance where you could kind of dip in and out, and, you know, you could go and sort of eat lunch while you were watching it, it just played with your attention differently in a way that wouldn't have happened if you were in a real sort of physical theatre or exhibition space with a sort of live performer and fellow live audience members. So there was something about both the experience of time outside of the festival and the kind of way that watching something in a sort of domestic environment in a more solitary kind of context then gives you permission to watch in a different way. And sort of, I think, you know, none of it was intentional on our part, but it was an experiment that threw up all these really interesting responses about how people might experience time differently in an online festival to what they do in real life.
Sure. Rashmi, any comments about the audience bit?
Yeah, you know, I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, but one of the things we do at Artex is we provide consulting around audience development. And we've been talking to, I mean, we have a couple of clients, and we spoke to them soon after COVID-19 hit to see, you know, what kind of responses they were getting for engagement online. And one thing that we realized is that if any of you look at audience segmentation while talking about your festival, you will find that the audience segmentation broadly holds. It's the scope and the depth which is changing. So for instance, if I have a category of young audiences or audiences from the age group of like 11 to 14, they will continue to be your audiences. But suddenly you've got 11 to 14-year-olds from Iran and from Afghanistan and from, you know, Sri Lanka and Germany. So it's that, you know, depth and geography that is changing. So that is something that, you know, I just wanted to sort of explore a couple of dimensions of what we mean by audience development and engagement and connect it to data, right? So when you're looking at data online and looking at analysis online, we need to ask, what is it that we're analyzing? What kind of data are we looking for? And I think segmentation is a good starting point to begin with. And then starting from there, look at what doesn't come naturally to us, which is things like page views and all of those other things, which beautiful numbers, and I can put it in, reports and get a lot of positive nods from sector leaders. But the fact is that we really don't know what that engagement is like. And in that respect, I think we again need to go back to traditional methods of analytics and data and talk about how is it that we are measuring, monitoring, and evaluating engagement. So again, the touch point, the reference point for that would be how, at Artex, for instance, when we do events, we always have an RSVP form. Right now, someone asked if they could, if the session is open to everyone. And I said, yeah, here's the link and here's the RSVP form. And we gather data from people who RSVP to our events first. So that gives us a sense of who are they, which countries they're coming from, what's their age group, which genre, subsector are they representing when it comes to the arts, if they are in the arts, of course. And that kind of data is then triangulated with what we are getting online, which is again incredible. And I think what this online world opens up is an enormous amount of data which otherwise we've not grappled with. I dare say it's big data because I don't think we are big enough to get that kind of big data. But at least in terms of grammar, that's something that we can dip into. So what kind of analytics are there? I'm not going to repeat what Sepehr and Jeff have mentioned because that's exactly the kind of data that we should be looking at. But if in isolation, it might give us what we call false positives in data, right? Like not imperfect data, perfect data, but with imperfect analysis, because we have no other conceivable measures to triangulate it with. So we use the RSVP data to do that, and then we follow it up with a feedback form as well. And we use these three mechanical compartments to be able to then look at how our audience is responding to our work online. Of course, I'm looking at a very limited view. I'm not looking at a festival. I'm looking at a webinar of this sort that would be conducted. But I agree with Jeff that the online space gives us a phenomenal amount of data if you know what you're looking for. Zoom itself is amazing. It really tells me where my participants have come from, when did they log in, when did they sign up for this event, all of that. So it allows you to also track how early are your participants signing up. So in a typical online, in a typical festival space, they say that if 1 week before your festival, you have 50% of your audience, you'll be house full, right? So what are those mechanics right now in the online space? We don't know. But I think starting from what you know is a very good place to begin. The other thing that I do want to mention is, again, you've already touched upon very beautifully about how the online experience is transformed today. And I think one of the things we have also realized is, and this is what we're advising everybody, that don't think long-term right now, because the situation is changing so fast. We ourselves are not doing anything more than 4 to 8 week strategies at the moment. Simply because, very early on, we had a lot more audience responsiveness, a lot more engagement, because everybody was uncertain. Everybody was trying to make sense of what this means for them. Everybody was trying to define a context. And then we had lockdown 2 and then lockdown 3. And now people are sick and tired of webinars. So it's not just people's perspectives, but their needs and the context, which is changing so fast. So in any kind of looking at analytics and audiences, we have to be open to looking at the data, and that data being valid for only 3 to 4 weeks and being able to move really quickly and not hold that as gospel truth, because it is changing very fast. And there are too many moving parts for us to start defining structures and rules out of them. The other thing that we were doing some research on is how our audience behavior is going to change post COVID-19, right? So, for instance, venues will open up. Festivals will happen with socially distanced context, and that's definitely going to happen, because I personally believe nothing can replace live. Nothing will replace live. What will happen though is people's attitudes and behaviors are going to change. And which means that the reluctance to be in a space, the anxiety around safety is only going to heighten. And no matter what measures and systems you put in, that kind of behavior and attitude is going to take time to change. And that's what I find really fascinating. Again, there is no hard evidence around this. It's a lot of researchers talking about how public, especially in the FMCG and market research space, talking about how consumer attitudes and behaviors are going to change. But I found that piece of thinking about audiences also quite interesting in helping us think about what kind of worlds will we inhabit, but without really committing to a particular world that we want to inhabit because of the kind of change. And finally, I think what I thought very interesting, which was there, one of our sector leaders here, Parmesh Shahani, who runs something called the Godrej India Culture Lab, mentioned in one of his pieces that let's not talk about the new normal, let's talk about a better normal. And I like that as a nice direction to go into when we talk about engagement and what does that better normal look like. And I am going to share one link with you again, is from an engagement point of view, and I still find that area very, very gray. How do you think about audience engagement online? Jeff again mentioned this right now about the rules around consuming content, and I hate using the word consumption over and over again, but just experiencing culture, experiencing a performance. Those rules have changed, and we don't know what the experience is like in a digital space, in a solitary space. But what is interesting is where you do have control is how much are you engaging the audience. So Sepehr mentioned chat box, for instance, which was great. We use that. We use polls. We use the Q&A box quite well. So whatever the mechanics that an online platform gives you, but at the same time, what content are you creating that's also creating that kind of engagement? There was a theater show that was done, an interactive theater show called Lockdown Love, in the very early part of the lockdown. I think early April. I've just sent a link onto that, where it was the performance was gamified, and that's a completely different level of engagement, where you're forcing the audience to engage with you in terms of content. So in that sense, it falls more into the immersive sort of theater experience space. So that is one mechanic, approach to thinking about engagement, which is very different from an artist just performing online. Without any kind of engagement. So what kind of engagement mechanisms are we building in to then define what kind of engagement is it creating? And that's another approach to sort of perhaps think of. And that's it from me for now.
Great. Okay, so Tom has a question, and then Tobias has a question after that. So Tom?
Just before the question, I was really interested in what Jeff spoke about in terms of time. I think the way we've sort of experienced these online festivals while exercising or cooking lunch or cleaning the house has been super interesting. And I thought actually one of the things that was I enjoyed when I was dipping in and out of Fusebox was the cookery demonstrations and these kind of more non-performative things or different kinds of performance. One of the other things that I really liked about Fusebox, where I felt it really captured a sense of Austin and this kind of legendary Austin weirdness that the festival is known for, that actually there was something about the visual aesthetic of it, the kind of work, the eclecticism of it, the tone of the performances, which really gave a sense of place. And I guess that's sort of my question is around this, which is if we're moving our festivals online, obviously we have the potential to reach a global audience and not just the local one. But one of the reasons I think why festivals are unique and distinctive and why we go to them is also to experience the work in the place and to experience the place through the work. So I guess I'm interested in this, in a way, these two challenges. Or I guess the question is how do you find a global audience but still hang on to a sense of the place where the festival takes place?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's this sort of danger of when you think about your audience as global and anyone, it sort of really, it drains a lot of the specificity that makes what we do interesting and meaningful. And I think, it was interesting. I agree, it really did feel like Austin, and it really did feel like Fusebox. And that was one of the really interesting pieces of feedback from a curator colleague who was like, how did that feel so much like the in-person festival? It really felt like an online manifestation of that. And I think it was around sort of the whole construct of the festival being filtered through Fusebox's own sort of values, and both sort of in terms of that really it was what the physical festival was, which was an inquiry into the nature of liveness. And that ethos is really, a quote of Ron, the artistic director of Fusebox, is that I always remember him saying at one of the in-person festivals is, to the unlimited potential of people sharing a space together. And I think that was a principle that they absolutely took into the virtual festival. And I think, aesthetically as well, the festival has a very identifiable sort of lo-fi, colorful, kind of very accessible kind of aesthetic that then was transposed into the design scheme of, the website that you landed on and how the work was framed and all of those kinds of framing devices. So I think part of it for me was about the fact that, even though the medium was so drastically different and so much of the work was so drastically different to what they usually presented, the kind of line of curatorial inquiry was so similar. You know, it was about experimentation, it was about risk-taking, it was about, all of these kinds of things that they've been interested in sort of as a festival for years. So I think part of it is that sort of, sort of being able to sort of make it more broadly accessible, but also like not just pitch it to anyone and everybody, because we all do have specific audiences and communities that we serve. And, I feel like that still has to be, for me, sort of whatever I do has to be first and foremost relevant to that community. And if we can find ways for other people to engage with it, or if we build it with other audiences in mind, but that's all sort of separate audience development strategies and that kind of thing. So I feel like it's a really good thing to think about.
Okay, so we're having another conversation in the chat group here. Apparently, Tobias no longer has a question because Tom took his question, but Tom suggests that maybe Tobias could answer the question as well, because the event where Tobias is involved has taken quite an interesting approach to this question this year as well. So maybe, Tobias, if you could maybe share your experience.
All right. Well, thank you. Didn't expect that, but yeah, in a way, we were also, thinking about keeping this sense of place while at the same time looking for a global audience. And so basically what we did, we had this situation that we wanted to do a city project, and we involved about 100+ artists from all over Rotterdam. And we're an opera festival, but we take the word opera very, it's in a very broad sense. So the singing voice is a key element, but then, all different kinds of influences and cultural influences can come into play. So basically, we had this project called Home Sweet Home, and the title was there for 1.5 years already, and then the lockdown came. So we thought, okay, well, we should do something with this. So basically what we did is that we made a script where all of these 100+ artists could, play a part in, and also had a co-creative agency in it. And then at the end, the whole script came together and we made a movie during lockdown times. And so it was a movie, 1.5 hour movie in 6 parts, 15-minute parts, about Rotterdam during these times. And it was a music theatrical piece. So basically, we showed the world what was going on in Rotterdam. I hope you're referring to this, Tom. I'm not quite sure. Yes.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you very much for that example of what could be done in lockdown as well. I wanted to maybe talk to the three of you about the monetizing of these online events. And understandably, going online happened very quickly, but I was interested, Jeff, in you talking about the festival in Austin, basically paying all the artists. How did they manage to do that? Is it a festival that has full sponsorship? Because were there any forms of income? And then Rashmi, the kind of experiences that you've been speaking about, did any of those festivals kind of monetize what it is that they did? And then Sepehr, if you could speak to that as well. If there is going to be a long-term digital festival that you do, have you thought of ways of monetizing it? Just because that's obviously one of the big things that festivals that are going digital are wanting to know. How do we make these things sustainable? How do we pay our artists and so on? So, Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, Fusebox has a very particular backstory in that sort of about 6 years ago, Fusebox sought and secured sponsorship to make the in-person festival entirely free to access. And that strategy, and now I'm speaking on their behalf, but that strategy was about diversifying and broadening access to their festival to particularly economically disadvantaged communities of color, marginal non-white mainstream American audiences, essentially to open up participation. And that's been very successful for them, and the audience has really diversified, and they monitor that through an extremely rigorous front of house system that makes sure that bookings get honoured and are actually sort of valued. So the festival had a open free access ethos before the digital platform was arrived. So it was always a kind of fait accompli that the digital festival edition of the festival would also be free to access. I am really rethinking that around LiveWorks though, and thinking about sort of introducing sort of online ticketing strategies. And I know that's been explored by a few virtual festivals. Our colleagues at GIF, the Gateshead International Festival of Theatre, introduced a sort of ticketing system for their digital performances. And I think there is something about the connection of ticketing, not only from a financial and monetary perspective to that, the liveness of the experience and the framing of the online performance as an event as well. That's kind of productive to think about, but also, those of us that rely on box office income and sort of audience income to sustain our programs, it's a critical concern with this kind of online space. And so really we're looking at sort of integrating a ticketing system that is parallel or on the same platform as our in real life program ticketing system, but that provides sort of a password or a QR code or a passcode to enable audience access to those forums. And really, looking at sort of where you pitch that ticket price as, not that the digital version is the B grade alternative to the IRL experience, that the ticket pricing sort of reflects the kind of quality of the work that you're seeing, and sort of, I guess, part of it is about the value that you place on the work that you're selling as well. So I think definitely that's it was free access for Fusebox was because that was the business model of Fusebox in the first place, and their sort of ethos, and that's the precedent. Whereas for LiveWorks in October, we're looking at a layer of some events being free and open access and some being ticketed.
And for Fusebox, their business model, is it about raising sponsorship from private sector or from the public sector in order for them to deliver what they do for a wider audience? And so corporates kind of have access to that audience. Is that their business model?
That is essentially.
Yeah.
So, America, a lot of the arts funding comes from private philanthropy, donations and sponsorships. So there is a specific fundraising campaign that Fusebox run around providing free access to the audience for the festival. And really that's about calculating what would be the box office income and raising that money from other sources as a lump sum figure to enable audience access.
Great, thanks very much, Jeff. Rashmi.
Yeah, so, I'll also sort of dip into Tom's earlier question as well. When you're talking about revenue models, I think I'm going to break it up into three parts, right? One is just the model. What kind of models exist and what kind of models are possible in this space? Ticketing is a very easy one. We've seen it being successful and it works. That's fantastic. Pay-per-view is another one. Of course, subscribing is another one. I think if you're able to get friends of a festival for 3 months, whatever we curate, people get it at a discount or free. That allows you to build in cash flow in very interesting ways. So to be able to look at getting people to pay a higher amount, or rather smaller amount, but early on would help us at least start putting together this online audience who is going to come back to you. Of course, sponsorships have already been mentioned. Collaborations with other revenue generating platforms is another possibility. I know that there are some for-profit platforms that have figured out the revenue model. And if you're able to collaborate with them to layer value of content, that could help. For instance, there are ticketing platforms that have a ticketing platform and they've created something for the online space. Can you take your festival to them, get their marketing support, expand the base, get in some amount of ticketing revenue, and then split? What we've seen in India in this space so far has largely looked at 3 different models. So these are all the models that exist. What's been happening in India? One, of course, is the fundraising model, which is you do the work, you do it for free, raise the money for COVID-19. Amazing. Doesn't really help the arts, but at least there's money being raised, right? And I think that's if you remove the subjectivity of where the money is going, just the objective fact that we've been able to raise 20,000, 10,000 pounds toward COVID-19 is step one, which means that people will give. Second is, as I'd earlier mentioned, most of the festivals that have managed to go online already have capital, and perceptibly they already have cash flow. So their runway is far longer and they can afford to do stuff free. So that's something that we've seen as one model that operates where they're basically making everything free. And there is some amount of ticketing that's happening in some of the other contexts, which are currently of varied value. It's not very high value in that space. But the kind of content that we've seen having a very high value currently, maybe only for the next 4 weeks, is learning and development stuff. So workshops, training, the kind of content that people see clear value in at this point. And the third is revenue share, where people have collaborated and put festivals together and just being like, we'll split the ticketing revenue 50-50. That minimizes your risk and gives you more resource in terms of human resource to work with and access to wider networks. I want to dip in from here partly into Tom's question, where he spoke about you have a global audience, and then what do you do about the community that wants to come to you and experience the space, right? And it's very difficult to think about it in an online context, but I would say that here is where the notion of value comes in. You've got a global audience which has a different need, and the need is the fact that everybody is dealing with this pandemic and they're all trying to make sense of what is going on, and they may be able to access your content because they've not thought about your work in this context before, which is excellent. But this global audience is great for ticketing revenue. I'm probably going to be stoned for throwing out words like this right now. It's great for ticketing revenue. You can completely use them. But the fact is that they don't have emotional connect with you. The emotional connect comes with your local audience. It comes with the communities that you already have and the communities of people who are around in your area. And how do you, and that's the community that's going to help you rethink the value of your ticket. Is it going to be £5, £10, £20? That number is going to change on the basis of how much they value your work. And that can't come from a global audience which has no emotional connect with you. In that respect, I think the answer somewhere lies in curation as well. If I'm able to put together an interactive game like I play, like I mentioned, Lockdown Love, it's great for me personally, but how much am I going to put a value to it for in terms of ticketing revenue or a ticket, as opposed to a guided walkthrough of a museum right next to my house? And it's that kind of local content that allows you to reimagine your locality and your space, and allows people to engage with your space, although virtually. Is still, I think, a positive step towards converting this online community into your sort of local community, for the want of a better word. Value in itself, when it comes to revenue models, is a big question, and how we negotiate and raise the value is going to be critical to the financial success of a digital festival. Simply because people don't have any notions of what they should be paying online. Currently, what we've seen evidence of what they are paying for online mainly is just workshops and those kind of learning and development sessions. And finally, the other thing to consider around revenue models is also scale. I might be able to charge 100 rupees which is about maybe just about £1, and that may be about for 500 people. So that in terms of the numbers, I would never have 500 people otherwise, but they're all paying us a little bit of an amount, and it allows you to still run the event, which may not be high on infrastructure costs. But if you're doing a workshop, which is about £20, but it's only restricted to 30 people, that's a completely different way of looking at that kind of revenue, right? So in terms of the kind of scale of your event and what you are able to get, those numbers completely change. You're not restricted by bums on seats anymore. And that's what's fascinating about rethinking revenue structures and revenue models in the digital space. Yeah.
Great. Okay, let's move on to Sepehr. And Sepehr, just to pick up in your particular context was something that Rashmi spoke about, the global audience, and you were speaking earlier on about the US embargo and what that means for you in terms of being able to pay artists, but also gather money from abroad because of the embargo. And seeing that we are an atelier dealing with solidarity, what might solidarity mean for you in terms of the possibility of linking with a festival elsewhere in the world that could raise money for you, be the conduit for money? So you might be recording this now, but I mean, the principle of it in terms of raising money for you, for your festival in a different location.
Well, this is a very long conversation. Well, the thing is, this was one of the plans that we were actually discussing with Fadi Borz and Nima about, like, moving the festival to a placelessness statue, not to be a bit. There's a voice from somewhere. Ingiz, I know, it was the video. So what we were thinking was that not to have the festival being promoted as a place in Iran, a festival in Iran, but this to in a way to promote this placelessness feeling of the festival, to be a festival of the world. So we were actually calling our colleagues to, also now I can actually say, to whoever interested, organization, institutions, companies, theaters, to think of what we could do together as an act of solidarity, because that's what at least COVID-19 showed us, that together we are more powerful. So to do this festival together, because what I mentioned earlier in the chat was that we've had a curational board consisting of Erica, who's here, Mira, who's here, and Lu Xiao, who's from Singapore and who was in the next festival, next Atelier. And it was an amazing experience to talk with 3 different time zones to curate a table, which is for 5 different time zones. But in case of ticketing and also raising for fund, this was our idea, at least. The thing that we taught so far in our discussions, to work with different institutions. And since Nima is America, it might be slightly easier, but might be also tricky, because Nima opened the page on Facebook. This is also something to be considered, and also to raise awareness, that Nima opened the Facebook page for getting fund for the festival, and it was only like $2,000, which is almost nothing in the festival business community. And at some point when we reached the $2,000, Facebook sent a message to Nima that, unfortunately, since this money is being raised for Iran, and Iran is under the embargoes, we would return all this money that has been collected to the donators, and we would close this page. And after so many talks from Nima with his friends in Facebook and Instagram, still we haven't received that amount of money. And it was about Nima, who lives in San Francisco, who's actually based there. So this is the problem. This is like a crazy problem that we also dealing through the theater agency that we are running with different festivals that I wouldn't name, but there were many festivals in Western Europe that we were forced to give them a bank account of a friend who lives in Turkey or somewhere to move the money for us for the shows that we are taking to the festivals. Or it took us 6 months to bypass 2-3 different people to go for the money to go to their account, and then they sent to the other person's account. So in order for the other person to be able to withdraw that amount of money, which is a huge amount of money usually with the festivals. And something that, like, we were talking about online ticketing, I would like to really point out that the online, personally, this is my personal idea, I don't know about the others, but online ticketing for me is not consistent. This is not a way to, I mean, the whole point of digitalization in the time of Corona is accessibility. This is more important. Accessibility to all. Like, I wouldn't have money to buy tickets for Kate's festival to watch the amazing shows that she curated for the Gift Festival if she wouldn't think of showing the shows for free and asking for the people to donate or buy ghost tickets. So this is a more, I would say, consistent. This is a more proper way. Not everybody is like me in my situation, but think about the people who are coming from less resourced country. I mean, I'm not Iran. I'm like, literally, we are sleeping on oil. But we cannot use this oil to watch Kate's Festival or Bergen Festival or Sibiu Festival. So that's why I'm totally against online ticketing. It should be for free. Then also it should be there should be something like donating the festival or buying ghost ticket, what Kunsten Festival des Arts did this year, in order to support the shows that couldn't actually participate in the festival.
Can I just add one thing to Sepehr's, what he mentioned about online ticketing? So we also struggled with that, right? Like, how do you charge, even if it's a small amount, even if it's £1, how do you charge around it? And one way that we try to figure out, the trickiness around this is we said we're going to charge for our events because what this gives is premium access to people who want to engage with the panel or the community that's speaking. And we're able to offer something more if you are able to pay. If you're not online at that time, for about a couple of weeks, you can get access to the recording for a reduced fee because the sense of urgency of seeing that content that you want to see online. So for instance, if it was, £1, it would be like 50 cents for that matter. And then you put it online for free. So what ends up happening is that you're able to give layered volumes of value to different people who may want to pay or may be able to afford to pay to have that kind of interaction with people. And this doesn't have to happen for everything. For some of the events that we planned, we said this could be one possible way of going about it. So it made us rethink. We also had the same questions about access and those kind of things. So we don't charge for all our content, but this was one way we thought we could navigate around some of the content which is relevant to people for those couple of weeks or 3 weeks.
I suppose one of the differences as well is that when you have the analog festival, people are buying tickets per person to access a particular show. Whereas if people are doing it online, it might be basically one person buying a ticket and it could be a family of 10 watching that particular show. So it's also just, you were talking about scale, Rashmi. It's just like different in terms of, I think, how many people one reaches. One doesn't actually necessarily know that in terms of the number of people watching a particular piece for the access that they might be paying. There is one last question we're going to have from Lisa. Sorry, Lisa.
Can I make a comment, Mike?
Yeah, sure.
I do agree with all you said, but all in all, the thing is, I do believe that this kind of like ticketing, even though with $5, it would ended up in the same way of like, I would make an example, then go back. Iranian Ministry of Culture, they tried to run this digital streaming of theaters, but as soon as they began, like they didn't begin streaming it for free, they began streaming it for selling a ticket. And as soon as selling tickets, the whole concept raised, the concept of commercial theater raised. So the theaters they were streaming and they were selling the ticket, they weren't the experimental student style, thought-provocative theater that they were selling. It was commercial, the same theater that the rich society of Tehran would go and watch and say, oh, I've been into theater, I've been in opera. So this is also a dangerous path to take. Like if you take it like a D&D game, whether to go this or this way, it would be it would even divide into more dangerous things. This could also like conclude in like the same pattern of curating the white, straight, Western, privileged directors like Mil Rao, Thomas Ostermeyer, Robert Wilson. I don't want to name the others, but let's just not give the long.
Yeah, Sepehr, sorry. I think, there's a huge discussion we can have around this particular thing as well, but I'm just aware that we are 3 minutes over time already. And I just did want to give space to Lisa. She's been having a hand up for a while, just to ask a question of the three of you. Lisa?
Yeah, great. Thank you very much. I actually have a question regarding the engagement, because I really understand the fact that you have to engage people if everything is online and keep the interactives. But we organize a film festival for children. So for us, it's actually really difficult with all the privacy laws, obviously, how to engage them. So I was actually wondering if you have any tips how to, in a way, keep it like also private, but have that engagement through online and actually connect all the children.
That is totally outside my realm of experience, unfortunately. Rashmi, was one of the film festivals that you mentioned, would that?
No, but I always have an answer, so I can answer. So the thing is, we've been talking to, I don't know if Ruchira has been a part of this atelier, but Ruchira Das, she lives in Calcutta in India, and she does a lot of work around young people's content. And we've been talking about doing a session on how does young people's content in terms of festivals, how are they dealing with COVID-19? So it's preliminary discussions that we've been having, and some of the concerns, we started thinking about what the problems are, right? Number one, the problem is that children can only get access if the parents allow them access. So starting with the permissions around parental access. And second, parents don't want to spend any more time with children right now because they just have kids around. So we've just begun to break down the problem around how do you create experiences and content for children online, especially in these times when parents also don't want overexposure of screens for the children. So it's still something that we are grappling with. In one of our projects, when it came to, we also work very closely with a museum. So we've tried to rethink our work. So we're taking actually one of our old exhibitions online now. And one of our key audiences there are young audiences. So what we've been trying to do is we've been trying to approach the children's engagement through two pathways. One being schools, and educators, and looking, because they already have the controls and the privacy mechanisms to be able to work through and negotiate around those challenges. And we're trying to work with them on pedagogy, on teaching, on impact, to be able to help them think about how do they teach better online, and through that and allow us to have deeper engagement with children online. So that's one pathway that we're looking at. And the other pathway is directly with the parents. We're trying to understand what their problems are. And if we can work with children without parents supervising them, or showing them content without parents supervising them, what kind of negotiations do we need to have? So these are the two ways that we've currently approached it. So far with parents, we've not managed to do any kind of live content, but we've just begun doing activity sheets where parents are able to download that content and then take kids through around the house, do a little like treasure hunt or activity, and then come back online and sort of see something online. So it sort of gives a little less screen time, and the screen time is really reduced. But again, I'm sorry, none of this is related to the film festival. It's just got to do with what we're trying to do to engage young audiences online. But I'm happy to update you on what we end up closing on as we move towards the young audiences sessions for Festival Connections as well.
Great, thank you very much for having an answer, Rashmi. So folks, this has been a really stimulating session, and it's been one of our early morning sessions, certainly for the B time zone, but it's really been fantastic. So thank you to all three of our presenters for their presentations and for their engagement around the kinds of issues that this particular panel has dealt with. So really big up to you folk. I'm not sure if Inge, you have anything to say, just in terms of closing this up.
Yes. So thank you very much. Also, thank you, Jeff, for talking a little bit about Fusebox, because unfortunately, Anne cannot join us for the second panel tonight. But it's great that we had it in this one. And as Sepehr was already talking about the festival of Kate Craddock Gift, we have another panel tonight with Kate and with Vincent from OFTA Montreal, who will discuss the same topic. It will be at 7:30 tonight, Central European summertime. So join us for that. Thanks so much, Sepehr, Rashmi, you've been fantastic, and Jeff, all really great to have you here. And there is a keynote which starts early for the Americas at 7, at 1 Central European summertime, and at 7 for the Hong Kong Perth time zone with Ana Carla Fonseca Rice, who will solve our money problems. She's an economist, so we will have again another perspective from Brazil, and she will talk about the role of creative industries in these current times. So see you all there, and in between have fun with the other work that we are doing.
Thank you very much, everybody. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye-bye.